All right. I think we're all set. So if you got questions as you guys come in, there's a little bar here on the side to go through and ask them, or you can ask through email, Remind, or Twitter. If you do email them, please make sure it's through Gmail. My Guilford County schools account finally got cut. If you see me look off, it's because the Blues game's on. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude, but I want my team to win. And yeah, so there's and I guess I'll preface this too. I have no clue if the stuff I'm telling you actually will help you tomorrow, just because I don't know what he's got in mind. I don't know. It doesn't sound like from some of you he's using my stuff. So I don't know if I can help you for tomorrow, but if nothing else, I can at least make sure that you're covered for a week from today, when you guys will be taking the real exam that matters most. Gosh, you'll have been done with it for 12 hours now, come this time next week. So I guess as you guys kind of trickle in, ask away. I see a few of you in, and I'm trying to remember. It's been so long, I don't remember how exactly you guys sent in question. Your test got canceled. Sweet. That's good. I certainly can still go through and answer any questions you guys have on this unit, even though I guess I'm not doing a test prep one. But that's good. So yay, awesome. Test got canceled. I guess I can ramble about Unit 6 or Unit 5. I've been asked to do that. I'll do a little bit more with 6. I'll say this: the exam doesn't worry too much about the world wars, even though I know that's the fun stuff to talk about. And certainly it sounds kind of like if it has been a kind of American based class of late, I'm sure that's what you guys have maybe focused on a little bit. But I don't have the exam's not going to go through and talk a whole lot about the ins and outs and details of World War I and World War II. It'll be like it has been with everything. Big picture stuff. It's going to talk about how how all of the areas in the world really kind of came in and helped out, not just the big players in the, I guess, stuff that everybody knows with Germany and all that. Let's see, what is going on in Africa during this time period? Africa, like Southeast Asia and lots of other places, Aaron, are going to be they're going to be helping out in the war. Most of these countries early in this 20th century are still controlled by European powers and imperialism that you hopefully learned about in Unit 5. Now in Unit 6, the first half, they're still going to be colonies. After World War II, you see massive decolonization. That was a big thing coming out of World War II, was that these countries, the whole goal was we're going to stop Hitler from creating this world empire. And now that we've done that, we seem a bit hypocritical if we continue to have these other smaller nations as part of our own empire. So, and the cost to rebuild. So a lot of African nations, a lot of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, a lot of these places have been going through really, really tough times as they're trying to establish themselves as their own independent nations. Some have struggled with how they're going to rule and be governed. You've seen democracies rise and fall in some of these places, and that's a big kind of gotcha question they like to throw is that Gosh, I lost my train of thought because I got a question. Sorry. The big thing with all this is that democracies are really kind of tough in some of these new places because they're become corrupt. Like China, for instance, has what's called a dictatorial dictatorship, where Mao let everybody vote, but he's the only candidate. And I think of what Russia is now with Putin, how things are very corrupt. And yes, there are elections, but you'll be shocked if anybody but Putin ever wins. And so that's what a lot of these African nations have gone through. South Africa is probably the most well known, with Nelson Mandela being freed and finally becoming president. And then you saw this in the last 5 years with the Arab Spring. They do sometimes ask questions about this. Sorry, I'm texting back somebody. But they don't, there's not tons you need to know. It's really kind of broad picture, very unstable, very much a challenge to establish themselves as their own countries. Most of them led by dictators, and kind of corrupting democratic processes and ideals. And you're starting to see more and more of that kind of step away. Like I said, with the Arab Springs, countries like Egypt, Tunisia, and others that have gone through these kind of really radical, almost revolutions of late. So hopefully that was a lot, and hopefully you got something good out of that, Aaron. Next question is, could I go over anything important involving Nikita Khrushchev? Khrushchev is, I believe, the premier during the whole Cuban Missile Crisis. And I guess this will tie in. Next question is Bay of Pigs, so I'll kind of combine the two. So Khrushchev takes over after Stalin. Was not as hardline and as much of a jerk as Stalin was, and I think that's the official term, is he was a jerk. He tried to put in some reforms, but wasn't really that successful. He tried to please a lot of people, and that didn't always work out in his best interest. His biggest showdown was with the Cuban Missile Crisis and coming after Kennedy, and that goes with the whole Bay of Pigs, which was Justin's question, where Bay of Pigs basically was, we got some of the those on Cuba who were against Castro and the communists. We as the United States sent some operatives down to try to start a revolution, kind of, or at least a disturbance against the Castro, and then that way we'd be able to come in and hopefully take over, at least, set up an invasion, and we'd be able to change the regime and all that. Castro got wind and found out, and that was a really obviously failed attempt of us trying to oust Castro, and certainly continue to really push the United States and Soviet Union closer to war. Missile crisis was the same thing. It got down to the point in early 1960s where either country thought that we'd be on the brink of war at any second. I mean, thankfully, cooler heads prevailed, and either country did use nukes. And obviously, that's the biggest concern. Biggest concern was when Cuba became communist. Is that now 90 miles from the Florida coast is a communist nation, and certainly the United States was worried that Russia or Soviet Union would stash weapons and the like there. So, hope that's a little bit. What do we need to know about Brezhnev? Not much. He came after Khrushchev, another in the long line of communists. Again, try not to get too caught up in the who and think bigger kind of things that the Soviet Union's doing as a whole. The main people that are going to stand out will certainly be Gorbachev, as far as Soviet premiers, just because he oversaw glasnost and perestroika, which were the two social, political, and economic changes, and that helped kind of set the Soviet Union from breaking its communist kind of rule. And ultimately, it was the end of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. So you'll need to know Gorbachev and what he did in that sense. Khrushchev and Brezhnev, mean, Khrushchev is certainly important because of the Cuban Missile Crisis and Bay of Pigs and all that. Brezhnev, not a whole lot was really going on during the 70s. You know, he didn't really, Soviet Union doesn't really get involved in Vietnam, which was kind of the big, obviously, conflict at that time. It was more China helping out Vietnam, the North Vietnamese, than Russia. So yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot you have to worry about with him. So yeah. What else? And sorry if you can hear our kids' monitor in here. Hopefully that doesn't get picked up on the audio. That'd be weird. My kids singing to themselves. You guys probably don't need to know. But yeah. I guess what else? I guess I can start rambling again. So I guess as I was saying, don't get too caught up on the world wars. Don't get real caught up on Korea and Vietnam, which of course is probably, I mean, at least from talking to a couple of you in your emails and everything, you've mentioned that was what specifically you guys have been covering. So let's see, what are some key ideas? Oh, I can post this up. What are key ideas we need to know about from Unit 6? The main ones we talked about are containment and brinkmanship. Containment absolutely is a big one. That's the United States policy to handle the Cold War. That's a big one for, I mean, the big, I'll get with containment. I mean, obviously that's what leads us to Korea and Vietnam and some of these other places, you know, Iran-Contra and other things that happened during the 80s, and some of our fights in Central America. Is our idea is never to attack and invade any communist country. It's just to make sure it doesn't spread anymore. And that gets into that whole domino theory where we're afraid that if one country was going to fall to communism, the neighbor of that country would, and so on and so forth. And we'd be outnumbered. And that's where a lot of the big issue and fear was. And yes, that's my son screaming. For the other things you really need to know about Unit 6, go back and make sure you know the key concepts. If you're not still using my website, please do so. I mean, please go on and I'm going to turn that off because he's actually really disruptive. Please go back on and make sure that you go through the key concepts. Know 6.1, 2, and 3. 6.1 is a lot more environmental and scientific stuff. You're going to need to know what the Green Revolution was, how we started moving to more green power and those kinds of things, and energy. Certainly science. Do you need to know everything about going into outer space? And no. Is it important? Certainly to understand that we did it, and part of the reasons why we dealt with Cold War, some of the new scientific technologies and discoveries that have happened in the last 100 years. Be aware that that all kind of ties together. 6.2, a lot is about the Cold War, world conflict, decolonization, and all of its trials. And most of the stories have certainly been more struggles than success stories. And 3, I guess I probably need to look it up. I don't even remember. Oh, it was culture and those kinds of things. You know, specifically, this is where they get some of the new DBQs I talked about in the video the other day. You know, sport, you know, the World Cup, Olympics, new music, how, you know, all the things that globalization really has brought on. That from the sounds of it, if you've only gotten to Vietnam, you probably haven't gotten too much into chapters 35 and 36, which deal a lot with globalization and how just how interconnected the world is now, how trade is instantaneous, how, I mean, you look at places like McDonald's, Coca-Cola, I mean, these are brands that are everywhere. And that kind of influence that the world has, where you know, goods are made in smaller, less industrialized countries, usually made for mean, businesses are outsourcing to all of these places, so to make more profit. That's a big thing to know and remember from 6.3, and that's how the world's done a lot to rebuild, certainly Asia and Japan after the war, and you see some of these countries that were devastated after World War II in the early 1940s, 50s, Korea, Japan, Singapore, Vietnam. I mean, these are more and more becoming economic powerhouses in a short time. So those are things. Don't get too caught up on the Cold War. It's important. Probably not going to be more than maybe 3-4 questions at most, I would say, though. Remember, it's 70 questions all kind of spread out. So, all right, starting to get some more questions. I've got one. I see Aaron and Audrey's. I'll get to yours. Lindsay, you sent me one through my text or remind here. Could I go over 9900 briefly and include basically every world region? I can look up certain stuff on my end. It'd be nice to have a timeline of what other regions, because we're basically learning U.S. history. I will do that. I'll put some stuff on the website. There's a really good PowerPoint that I have that briefly is going to look at what the rest of the world is doing right after World War II. And so you'll be able to see what decolonization was looking like in Africa, in South Asia with the partition and independence movements, in India, what's going on in Southeast Asia, what's going on in South America, as well as here and in Europe. Timelines are kind of tricky. I mean, the first, not a whole lot goes on from 1914. I mean, 1914, you've got World War I up till 1919. From all of the 1920s is usually, except for the Germany, most places are experiencing economic growth. You hit the Depression early around 1929. That's when the Great Depression hits worldwide. It's not just a U.S. thing; it does impact the entire world. The rise of Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo, the Axis powers, dominates the 30s. World War II, the early 40s, the Cold War for most of the rest of that time. And like I said, decolonization is really going to be the key timeline as you see the Middle East, Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, all gain independence. All those places, along with South American countries, are going to go through a lot of different issues with establishing themselves as governments and what kind of governments they want to run, how democratic they really want to be. And you get up to today where now we're kind of in this more global, after the fall of the Cold War. It's been very different, for a long time at countries it was, you line up, you have an enemy and you fight to beat them in every kind of way you can. And now, at least for the United States, we don't really have one, and other countries there aren't. They still have rivalries and stuff, India, Pakistan, and some of these, but you don't have that conflict that we've seen for a long time. And so that's where we've kind of seen this rise of terrorism. We're not fighting nations. We're fighting more ideologies and radical sects as much as anything. But I'll put up the decolonization notes, and I'll go through all my stuff for Unit 6. I'll put it on the website probably tomorrow during my planning, first thing tomorrow morning. I'll definitely get it up there tomorrow night by the latest, so you guys can go through some of the notes that I have and other things to help you out. Green Revolution, when it happened, started in the 50s. That's another thing, Aaron. I've got a real good website that I'll post to the website. It's fairly simple to kind of go through and read. It's got a lot of good stuff on it, though. I'll see if I can bring it up, actually. Hopefully you still see me and not my browser. But the Green Revolution really started in the 1950s and 60s. Oh, tell me I still have this somewhere. Oh, come on, St. Louis. Well, shoot. Where did I put it? Shoot. I'll go back, like I said, and find this. I mean, I can't find it in my bookmarks and everything, but when it happened, 1950s and 60s. A lot of it came after the Depression. I mean, really, it started as early as the Depression. You start to see some semblance of it. Most of it happened, though, after World War II. It's kind of a way to rebuild and looking at alternatives for fuel and those kinds of things, different ways to regrow crops. I mean, you got to remember in the 1950s, much of Europe and a lot of other places are in ruin, and so that you're looking for fast and alternative ways to regrow crops and the like. So you're looking for creative new methods, and so that's what the Green Revolution did. Can I review Qing China opium trade as well as the other Chinese dynasties? Yes. The Qing dynasty came after the Ming dynasty, of course, when that was 1700s or so is when the Qing kind of come into play. They aren't really that do much of note other than allow foreign influence into the country, and that goes terribly wrong for China. They had several countries come in and try to divide and contain it, create influence on the country. It didn't go so great. Eventually they get to the point where they start, that's what leads to the Nanking and Boxer rebellions, are trying to get rid of some of the foreign influence. They start, burning Christians or persecuting, not burning, Christians, and eventually they're fairly unpopular. So by 1911, that's when they're overthrown by the first of China's two revolutions, and that's really the one that kind of ended dynastic rule. The other dynasties, to go back, I mean, they all kind of fit the same build except for the Yuan, which are the Mongols. Most all are Confucian. Most all are big in trade. Song and Tang China are the two with that whole golden era, where they really, culturally and economically were really far superior to anywhere else in the world. And after the Republic, in 1911, after World War I, China will go communist, and that's been a big thing since was Mao taking over. So yeah, that's kind of it, I guess. Certainly Mao was very popular with the peasants, especially. They really bought into the whole idea of a non-elite, everyone's equal kind of ideals. It didn't really play out that way. But yeah, his China is very, very odd. Much more fought against everybody that had ideas. The whole Cultural Revolution that Mao pushed on, taking intellectuals and all the smart, lawyers and doctors and best and brightest in China, taking them out of their work and making them work the fields and jailing them and killing them. Was probably not China's proudest moment or anything. Very kind of bizarre piece of history. So hope that was a little bit. Let's see. We're a month. Yeah, I know you guys are way behind. You guys probably should have ended last month. I was asked to sing with the Dynasty song, maybe later. What do we need to know from the 80s and 90s from Aaron? From the 80s and 90s, end of Cold War. That's the biggest one. And no, that's obviously Gorbachev. That's what Glasnost and Perestroika helped kind of establish some of the giving more freedoms, both socially and economically, to the Soviet people. You slowly are going to start to see some people, some countries start to slowly be given their independence. And by 89 is when the Berlin Wall falls. 90s, the whole Soviet Union kind of falls apart. and that's when you see this mass decolonization effort in the Eastern Bloc, a lot of independence of new nations. For the 90s, there's some genocide certainly to know. They may ask or bring up Rwanda or the conflict in Serbia with the Bosnian Muslims. Darfur even may be on there. And again, if you see these terms, just realize these are all genocides that have happened. Darfur was in Sudan. Serbia was in Serbia and Bosnia, and then Rwanda was in Rwanda, which is Central Africa. The other big things, like I said, globalization is going to be a big one. You know, what has become this new kind of computer and technological age. There may be something on there about 9/11 as far as you know, how it's shaped kind of the global landscape. You know, this ideas of terrorism and all that it's shaped the landscape today. And there may be something about the rise of Pacific Asian countries, like I said, Japan, Korea, some of these countries that, you know, Taiwan, that for a long time, really 50 years ago, were next to nothing and have been rebuilt into economic powerhouses and manufacturing powerhouses. You see a lot of the goods made in China and Vietnam and Indonesia, and so these are big places for manufacturing as well. But there aren't many specific things. Again, you know, even at, I don't know if this will necessarily make you feel better, if I can do some quick math, because I don't know how good I am at that. Unit 6 is only going to make up 14 questions on the exam. And they have to spread that out of all of Unit 4. And so there's only, you know, there may be 1 or 2 questions on the 80s and 90s that they ask. But I mean, they're going to ask stuff on, well, there'll be a question on World War I and World War II. It's not going to be the simple, you know, hey, tell me what D-Day was, or, you know, what started, you know, what was the Holocaust? Obviously, those aren't AP World type questions. But there will be questions about the world wars. There'll be 2 to 3, you know, probably 2 on the Cold War. There'll be 2 on decolonization. So I don't necessarily, you know, don't try not to get too hung up on decades. And like I said, please go back and go to my website, go back through and see what all the key concepts really line out. And because that's what they take the test from, and that's straight from the AP. They're not trying to do a gotcha there. I mean, that's what their whole course is. So hopefully those help. Michael, good to see you. Could you go over some of the early empires in the Middle Eastern area? I'm guessing you mean going all the way back to units 1 and 2. And Aaron asks, I'll answer your question. Yeah, I can post the names of the genocides online and where they are. I'll put up that stuff. I'll try to make some notes and stuff for all this to cover it. Middle Eastern empires, I mean, if you go way back, the Sumerians, the Assyrians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, don't get too caught up in early civilization, because that's going to be 3, maybe 4 questions tops on the test. And it won't be an essay question either. So I wouldn't use any of those or worry too much about those. If you're talking more modern, I mean, since then, Persia, Alexander, the Byzantines, they're taken over by the Mongols, and then the Ottomans, and the Ottomans run that till really World War One. Since World War One, the British took over for a little bit. There's some acts where they split up some of the territory. I'll actually post a video. Really, I think it's really funny. I mean, with my sense of humor, done by John Oliver as kind of a British guy, arbitrarily drawing the lines, border lines, and that kind of leads into more of the issues that you see in the Middle East and these countries now. There aren't too many empires, at least currently, after the Ottoman. And the Ottomans, I mean, we talked about them for a while. Going back to Unit 4, there's not anything really different that they do in Unit 5 that they were doing before then. And like I said, the early ones, I mean, you've got Babylon and the Babylonians. I mean, that's, shoot, what's his name? Hammurabi and some Nebuchadnezzar and some of those who are maybe, you know, more important, I guess, at least more recognizable by name and the like. So, and I answered that. I will put some of the stuff online. I'll try to just remind me that. I mean, send me emails if I put stuff up and it's not specifically what you guys have or are looking for. I mean, please feel free to remind me, email me. So yeah, keep me up to date on some of those things. So to have good review websites for the exam. Yes, I do. Big one is I'll post the links on Twitter and I'll put the link on my website again too. It's done by a guy named Mr. Freeman, who actually I got a lot of my stuff from my website from. But he's been doing a blog for the last, I think he started his countdown at 100 days. Maybe it was only 70 or 80. But every day he's going through a piece of breaking down standards from the key concepts, going over an empire, a time period, important things that are fairly short and simple. And so just on his blog, you can scroll down one, you know, he's on day, whatever, 6, I think, or 7 today. And he'll do that probably up to next Thursday. But he's had some real good stuff on there. I'll post links to a few other sites that I used, at least, to get information from that simplify some of the key terms and key concepts, and go through. You know, some of you have seen me on Twitter using certain hashtags. I mean, use a hashtag, you know, just WHAP for, you know, some of those things. You know, you may be able to find some stuff. I'll keep, if I see other teachers are doing review sessions, I'll keep retweeting them out to you guys, and you guys can jump in and hopefully find some of those. Learnerator, and it's exactly how it just spelled. Learnerator.com is another one that we tried using yesterday, or not yesterday, last year, sorry. Some of my students liked it, some of them didn't. Thought it wasn't as easy as Get a 5, but that's another review site where you can get some practice tests and stuff. And if you didn't see the videos from the other day, I mean, I highly recommend getting a review book somewhere. You know, go find the juniors and beg, borrow, and steal theirs. Tell them that I told you to do it, and just to see some of the questions, see those practice exams. I will tell you there'll probably be a handful, maybe half a dozen ones with pictures or charts and stuff like that. Remember, when you're analyzing charts and pictures, you know, look at unless it says what do you infer or what can you deduct or deduce from this. Keep things, you know, if it asks you what can you tell just from this picture, I mean, you know, it really is you know, kind of try to keep it simple with that. And if you think back, I know it was one of the first questions I asked you guys on one of our first tests. You had the bronze statue. What does this tell you? Well, it tells us they could use bronze, and don't necessarily get rid of the easiest answer because you think, oh, well, this is the AP exam. It can't be that easy. They are going to throw those at you where, well, I hate to say not to trick you or to get you, but I think that is what some of the things that they do. I do think that there is some of that element to it, unfortunately, where they try to just to make sure that you're paying attention. So there will be some questions where you're going to go through and you'll be like, wow, that's really easy. And then you'll be others that you'll look at and you'll be like, God, I have no idea. Or we didn't cover this. Or, and not just because it was Unit 5 or 6. I mean, it could have been easily stuff from from units 1 through 4 that we went through and we didn't cover. You know, as long as half the tests you're not feeling that way, then you're okay. You know, if you go through and you're like, wow, there was like four or five questions I had no idea, we never covered it, then that's pretty good out of 70. If it's 30 questions or out of 70, then certainly I didn't do my part, and or you slept through the class, which I know I had a couple that you maybe fell into that group, but most of you did really, you know, well and all that. So I had somebody ask me on Remind which units are going to be emphasized the most. None. Not the answer you want to hear, I'm sure. So it breaks down roughly 14 questions for Unit 6, 14 for Unit 5, 14 for Unit 4, 14 for Unit 3, and 14 for Units 1 and 2. So 1 is going to be the least. They'll probably split those 14 questions up. They'll do about maybe 4 from Unit 1 and 10 from Unit 2. But after Unit 3 through Unit 6, it's pretty well spread out. So there's not any, you know, I can't go through and say, hey, make sure you know Unit 4, you know Unit 6 or 5, because they spread it out pretty well, and obviously that's intentional. What units will the essay questions from the exam be mostly from? I have no idea. I will put a link to the last. AP publishes all the old essay questions. So I'll put that link up, and you can go through and read every essay question since the AP World Exam started in 2002. So that's 13 years worth. You'll see some have been recycled after a few years. Obviously, the ones from last year won't be on this year. And there's sorry, I'm watching highlights of my hockey game. Usually, I mean, again, it depends the essay. DBQs are from all over. DBQs, I've seen them from Unit 2. I mean, we did that with the Buddhism document, or DBQ. Last year's was on disease in World War I. That was Unit 6. DBQs tend to probably be more Units 4, 5, and 6, probably even more 5 and 6, because that's where you have more documents from. That's when writing printing press is 1450. So everything past that, you get a lot more documents being preserved and saved. So you tend to see more of the DBQs be more recent. But as I've said, I said in the video the other day, DBQs are all over the place. They pick any random topic they can because it all comes from the documents. If you have background information on that, great. If you don't, it doesn't matter, because you're getting most of your information from the documents anyway. It's how you analyze and interpret and can put all that into an argument rather than what you know about, Spanish influenza in World War I like last year. The CCOTs and comparatives are a little bit different. You tend to see those probably. Unit 3 is a popular one just because it was so lengthy. There was a lot that happened in Unit 4 and 5. Those usually are the ones for CCOTs and comparatives. I have seen some from Unit 6. So again, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that one, Aaron. It all depends on what they feel they haven't gone from. I mean, certainly for CCATs, there are only so many topics you can kind of use. Labor systems was last year. Trade's a popular one. Maybe you could do international relations or state building, decolonization, but there's not. You need to have a big enough theme that has continued on for at least 100 to 200 years worth of time in a unit. So you can't just go through and pick something arbitrarily or at random, because you're not going to be able to write an essay off of it. So you still trying to pick to those big themes. And so if I had to guess, I'd say 3 or 4. Although last year's was labor systems in Unit 4, so maybe 3 or 5 to mix it up. But I'm not 100% sure. Sorry. Um, let's see what else. So yeah. So what else? And sorry that I guess you guys are learning U.S. history. Although I guess if you're, um, you'll be super prepared for APWH next year. All of you who are going to do that because you've had an extra semester of American too. Um, but it is what it is. So hate that it's worked its way out like that. But uh, it's a challenging course. I mean, I couldn't imagine being thrown into it. So I'm sure he's doing the best he can. Anything else? I know there's not tons of you, but I'll help out who and whatever I can. Are there usually a lot of questions based off cultures and religions on the exam? Um, yeah, I don't know how they split things up as far as the five themes. Politically, socially, politically, geographically, culturally, economically. I don't know what the split is with those. But there will be. Make sure. Um, there's realize culture is more than just religion. Don't forget about all of the artists and artwork and sculpture, and don't assume that culture has to go along with these times like the Renaissance. Culture has been happening for a long time, and some of the questions they may ask you are, excuse me, seem simple, but it's still culture. Do you need to know all the religions, the ins and outs? No, by no means. Does it help to know where they're from, where they originated? Yes. And certainly more, it's gonna, know big things that happen within the religion. The spread, the tie-ins between Islam and trade through most of the 800s through 1000. Know the role that Christianity played early on or in the late Roman Empire, and then um, its work in overseas exploration and how that really kind of was one of the themes in pushing the Spanish and Portuguese abroad was finding more followers of Christ and certainly spreading their religion. Um, the creation of Israel obviously ties in huge with the Jewish state and religion. If anything talks about Hinduism or the caste system, that's always India. If anything talks about Confucianism or scholar gentry or the scholar exams, the state exams, that's always China. So they may ask you questions that seem more interconnected with the country or politics, but it's still kind of culture and religion. I had a question on Remind before I get to yours, Aaron. Um, how do you stop from getting nervous about stuff? I'd say something stupid like, and pretend everyone's naked or something. But that'd be inappropriate and probably not helpful. Um, uh, it's just a test. I mean, I know it's a big deal. Um, hopefully, he's told you that it does not matter how you do on the AP exam. Has no bearing on your grade in the class. So you could be failing all year long and you are some kind of idiot savant and pass it and get a 3 or a 4 or a 5. And I've had people who've done, busted their tail and done great, and they show up on test day and they got a 2. Um, and those things happen. I mean, it's not the be all and end all. It's not like when I took AP exams where you had to pay the, $85, $90 to take the test. So it's not like you're out any money. Um, it's think of it more as a high reward, pretty low risk. I mean, yes, it's stressful. It's a test, but hopefully your parents are going to let you take the afternoon off and you can take the test. And then after 12 o'clock, you can go home and take a nap or just kind of veg out and recover before you go back to school on Friday. And do the best you can. I mean, if you study and you put the work in, then you guys will be fine. And if you can go back through and use the website, go through all the tools and everything with the essay writing. I mean, that's another thing I'll definitely stress is make sure you use those resources. If you've put in the time, then you'll be fine. There's nobody I taught last year that didn't probably, that put in the work and came up short. Maybe 1 or 2 out of 80 plus. And those that struggled, they struggled, unfortunately. But most people did pretty well, or about where you'd kind of expect them. And to be honest, the multiple choice isn't really the big, not to scare you about the essays, but the essays will be kind of the bigger issue. And it all depends on what kind of writer you are. And if writing hasn't been your thing all year, I mean, it's going to potentially trip you up next week. If you've been a strong writer all year, or you've improved at least, then, that's a lot of times the difference between, 2 to 3, a 3 to a 4, or hopefully we've got some 5s this year too. I've got a few more questions rolling in. Aaron Bear asks, what was Unit 5 mainly about? 4 big things, and this is what the key concepts I'll cover. Industrialization. It starts in England. Their resources, coal, they've got all the right factors. And so they push it. The inventions like the steam engine and everything else really push it. Certainly it helps create the British Empire. Because of industrialization, other countries will soon follow, the United States, parts of Europe, Germany, Italy especially. You see it very little in other places. Japan will, but not China. The Ottoman Empire doesn't really. It's going to separate certain countries. And because, a lot of these countries that are industrializing are small and resource poor, they need to go get raw materials, just like they did when they set out to get colonies in the 1500s with Unit 4. That's what's going to lead them to imperialism. And so now imperialism is just colonialism on steroids. So rather than just, hey, we're going to take this colony and kind of run it with puppet governments and you tell us what to do, it's a lot more stringent, more rules and oversight, and they're going to really exploit the people of the countries they oversee politically, socially, economically, all of those things. Revolutions is the other one. This is the time where you see the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Latin American revolutions, the Haitian Revolution, the revolutions of the 1840s. Germany and Italy become nation states. The Boxer Rebellion and those things in China. And then lastly, this is the first time you're going to see global migration is during Unit 5. We've seen people move around the globe like we did in Unit 4. Now we're going to see people, for the most part, really start to move to new nations in hopes for a better life. Not just, hey, we've got a colony. Let's a few of us go send over to America and try to start out. It's life is no longer good enough here. So you don't see people leaving for necessarily because they have to with religious reasons or persecution. You just have people get tired of of living where they go, and they're going to around the world, not just coming to the United States. You have people from Japan going to South America. You have people from Asia coming to the Americas. You have um, people in Europe going to different areas. The potato famine's another reason that you see this global migration is a big kind of theme. So hopefully those help. I see yours, Annie. Aaron asked me one first, but I'll get to yours. You're sending them through Twitter. Aaron's question was, what should we do on the CCOT if we have no idea what to write and totally blank and forget everything? Skip it. Go to the next one. I mean, that's the biggest thing with the essays. You get all three at the same time. Open that packet. See what the three topics are. If one of them jumps out and you're like, I know this, start there. If all of them you're kind of like, I think I kind of know, I would say start with the DBQ. If there's one that you look at and it looks like it's written in Gaelic or some other foreign language, make it wait till the end. And hopefully by the time you've written the DBQ and you've written the comparative, maybe some tangent will jump into your head and you'll be like, oh yeah, I kind of think I know. Or that's the essay that you can go and write about how unfair this is, that your teacher left midway through the year and the guy they brought in had never taught it before, and you shouldn't be forced to write this because your teacher left and is a jerk or something. People do that. So that could be the one you do for the CCOT, I guess. But I guess on a more serious note, make sure that's the last one you write. And like I said, hopefully by the time you've done the other two, something will jump back in your head and you'll be like, okay, I kind of know this, or I think I can go. There won't be anything. I mean, maybe you'll go blank. I doubt there's an essay or a topic that will come up that people will open up and be like, we definitely didn't cover this. Because like I said, I mean, it'd have to be one of the more recent ones. And I don't think there's something obscure enough that it just would be completely, I certainly hope that would not have been just completely skipped. Or maybe that, I mean, again, you're all very smart. There's certain topics that perhaps you'll just kind of know from memory, French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, those kinds of things. So Annie wrote, if I don't know anything about the CCOT topic, what are some wide range things that we can write about? Well, that was one, don't blame me, blame my teachers. Or try to tie into something in the area. I mean, they're not going to pick any areas that you've never known. I mean, you always have a choice. Remember that too. I mean, with the CCOT and the comparative, they will always give you an option. The comparatives, it's, compare two and you choose three. So if you remember ones that we did, it was, tell me what, European influence looked like in Africa, South Asia, or Southeast Asia. Well, we barely covered Southeast Asia. And so no one picked it, and that's how it should work. Most people could go, and the same with the CCOTs. Usually they'll give you two, if not three options, and you pick the area that you know. So, if you go through and you feel like you know a little bit more about Latin America, pick it. If you know more about Africa or South Asia, pick it. Don't get fancy or cute. Don't go through and be like, well, I think I know a little bit about the Middle East. I'll pick it, even though, because like I said, you may know, if you feel like you know an area well enough, you may be able to tie in things whether you realize it or not, or things will start coming to you once you write. And remember, you can draw lines through stuff. You can erase. You can write in the margins for your essays. I mean, it's not a perfect test paper that you're turning in. They expect, the writings to be all over the place. I mean, they expect you to cross through stuff. They expect you to have a caret. They expect you to, write a sentence in the margin and write the arrow in and say, put this here. You don't get marked off for any of that stuff. That is all completely okay. So, as you write, try not to get too flustered, and, as it's, it's not the end of the world if you go through and you remember something halfway through, or oh shoot, the last paragraph, I should have added this. Write in the margin and draw the arrow in and make it work. Any others when in doubt? Not as many obvious ones. I talked about India and China so far. I know Protestants and Catholics always don't get along, and that kind of ties into the next question I'll get to. Let's see. When in doubt, it's always bad for people of color and women and natives. When in doubt, it's, I don't know. I mean, the big religion. I mean, religion's always going to tie in somewhere to politics. Almost always is going to tie into politics. Whether you go all the way back to the very beginning, and you had the priests were usually also the rulers or one and the same. The whole ideas with mandate of heaven and all these other places had these similar ideas that they were put in power by God, or they were God's representative on earth to lead. Absolute monarchy. Carried on that whole tradition and idea. So there's always been a very strong link between religion and politics and power. Slavery's bad. I mean, I'm trying to think of other kind of obvious when in doubts. With some of them, war usually in more modern times, war has usually been good economically. Not that anyone's gone rushing off to go kill innocent people of other countries of their own, but you got to make weapons and sold supplies for soldiers, and grow crops and food for them, and so you tend to see economic booms coincide with war. I think that's kind of all I can think of for that. Protestant Reformation for my next is so the Catholic Church at this time is going through, and this is the late 1400s, early 1500s, are going through and basically have gone unchecked in Europe for a long time. Are getting to the point now where they're doing what they called indulgences, where basically it was a bribe. Hey, you really want to pay, have us absolve your sins. It's going to be a little, it's going to cost you. And if you were rich, you didn't necessarily like the idea, but you could live with it. If you were poor, though, I mean, this was detrimental. I mean, you're living your life as a good, devout Catholic and feeling that you're doing everything you're supposed to. And then, someone's coming along and telling you that it's going to cost money, which you don't have, to absolve your sin and get into heaven. And so a lot of people really didn't like this practice. Martin Luther is the main one who kind of comes and sets these things in motion. He was a theology scholar, a lawyer, and he famously posts his 95 Theses to one of the church doors in Germany. And the Reformation wasn't just religious also. It was also the fact, like I said, the Catholic Church had been really unchecked for a long time in Europe and kind of got to do with whatever they want. They were taking over lands and in countries outside of Italy that they really didn't have much right to. And so, places in Germany and other places got tired of, why is the Pope telling me that he owns my land when he's hundreds of miles away and I never see this guy? How come? There were issues with stuff like that. And so Luther starts his own church eventually. You see others start that, John Calvin, Henry VIII, other people start to challenge the Catholic Church, and all of these kind of shoot-offs become known as all under the Protestant faith, or protest is kind of the root keyword there. So that's all under that whole idea. So and it's going to cause tension in Europe for hundreds of years. Protestants and Catholics are going to fight. You're going to see, France is going to remain fairly Catholic. England's going to be more Protestant. They're going to have several wars over religion. They passed things about tolerance. The Edict of Nantes and some of these other things were all about toleration and stuff like that. But it was really more just kind of a, you know, we won't burn you at the stake. And so, um, so there's that. Is divine right a Catholic thing? Um, well, really, I mean, for most absolute monarchs, I mean, they are, I mean, that is Catholicism because a lot of that came before Protestantism does. So it's kind of one and the same. For a long time, Christianity and Catholicism are identical until you hit the Protestant Reformation. I think it's more, I don't know if it's necessarily a Catholic thing over a Christian thing. I don't think you necessarily, it matters if there's a difference. For a long time, I guess it's more a Christian thing than just Catholic because there are some Protestants that were absolute monarchs, like you saw with in England, but it's not. I don't know. It kind of goes with all of them. Zoe just asked me, what is Marxism? I think. Yeah, Marxism is the early form of communism. That is obviously under the influence of Karl Marx, who was the wrote the Communist Manifesto, was the first one to come up with the whole, workers' revolution, the proletariat, fighting against this upper kind of middle class, and this is really where you see the middle class kind of shift, and you have people in upper management who were middle class are now kind of taking the place of some of the what used to be the noble class, and so these upper middle class are starting to become really wealthy, and the workers are now becoming, there's not a slave class anymore, peasants really. So now you're seeing this working class they felt was being more and more exploited and taken advantage of, put in these situations with, um, if hopefully you covered with the Industrial Revolution, but with industrialization and urbanization, working conditions are horrid. I mean, this is where you have child labor. This is where you have, um, you know, workers' fatalities. I mean, by the day, um, people working in coal mines pulled out of schools and working in coal mines till, at 12, 11 years old because they could fit into some of the tighter spaces and working, 15-hour days. And and so Marx kind of stepped up and said that, this isn't how we should live, and this isn't what, these people who are working so hard should be put through. And so his idea was more to have this society where everyone was equal. There wasn't no kind of upper management versus the workers. It was more, we all are kind of working together for a common goal. Um, Certainly the ideas of communism none have ever truly had that kind of sentiment because if that were the case, you wouldn't need a dictator to be in charge and tell everybody what to do because, if you're all supposed to be equal, then, how can one person have that much power? So, and Marxism's idea, are flawed too. I mean, the whole idea of, well, everybody should get, work the same and paid the same and treated the same is a great in theory, yes. If I told you at the beginning of the year, hey, it doesn't matter how hard you work, you're all going to get a 2 or a 3 or whatever. Some people would be stoked and that'd be great, and others of you would be really ticked off because you're like, well, what if I want to do better? Well, it's too bad you can't. And so you lose some of that kind of initiative to better yourself and stuff like that. And that was certainly one of the big critiques of Marxism and that whole idea. So hopefully that helps. And obviously it's odd that, he writes this in the mid to late 1800s. It's not till 1919 that you see the first communist nation with the fall of Russia and the beginning of the Soviet Union after the revolution there. So it's something certainly that took time. Can I take the exam for you? No. You have to have ID and all that, as I'm sure they've told you. I don't know if I can pass for 16 any longer. Sorry. Um, I think I got to teach that day probably too. So, And then probably, to be honest, I don't even know if I'd go through and be able to get a 5 right now. I'd probably, knowing me, I'd go out there and suck or something. So, let's see. Somebody buzzed in. Oh, not from any of you, so not important. So what else? Or anything else? We got about 10 more minutes or so. I think I've got it. I know it said an hour and a half, but I think I'm gonna cap it at 9:30. And so if there's anybody, obviously, I'll post this on YouTube because I know there are a few people who probably have better things to do with their Thursdays, um, especially probably once they heard that the test was canceled. But I will do another one of these next week, probably on Monday, um, to do more stuff for the AP exam because some of you have asked. So if you've got other questions, I can certainly go through those. All right. What is authoritarianism? I was reading about how after gaining independence, many Latin Americans develop authoritarian governments. It is the almost identical to a dictator or a dictatorship. Authoritarianism is where the power goes to an authoritarian, or basically one person who has authority over everything. And so that's what that is. And like I said, this is where I said this earlier. A lot of these countries are struggling, and so you see strong people kind of rise out of corruption and other things that are happening and plaguing some of these places. So they look for strong leaders to kind of take charge. Usually these are military um, people. You see a lot of coups where military generals will take power and develop these authoritarian governments where they have complete control over everything. They have the army, they'll listen to them. Usually they've done something successful with the army, so that kind of gives the people confidence in them, um, and they kind of take charge. And the country, I don't want to say is at their mercy, because um, authoritarianism isn't necessarily always the worst thing in the world. It usually hasn't necessarily turned out great, um, but um, it, it is usually you are kind of at the whim of whoever is in charge, and no one is really there to check them like you have with Congress or Supreme Court here in the United States. So what, if anything else? I'm glad at least there's no trolls this time. It was really annoying having a couple of people, although I think I know who one of them was. I hope I'm wrong and it wasn't him. Hope it was somebody just random who wanted to be a jerk, but I have a feeling it was one of my students. But I'm glad I haven't had to deal with any of that today. So thank you guys for that. It's good questions, and hopefully I've helped a little bit and been somewhat insightful and not too boring. I guess anything else these last 5 minutes, and not to put people on the spot or rush any of you. I'm sure some of you are probably flipping through thinking, gosh, what can I ask him? What can I ask him? Again, please feel free, email me anytime. And I'll help you out as best I can with any questions you guys have, if you can think of outside of this time period or anything else. So I'll help you out as best I can between now and Thursday. And I'll say again, do a bulk load this weekend, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Do not pull an all-nighter Tuesday or Wednesday trying to study. I mean, not to be rude and say that if you don't know it by then, it ain't going to do you much good. But, the last thing you guys want to do is go into the exam being exhausted and not at your best. So try to do a bulk of your things this weekend. No, it's my pleasure, you guys. I miss you guys all too. Um, um, And like I said, if there are other things that you guys can think of, I'll post. Like I said, I'll try to remember to go through and start putting some of my Unit 6 stuff online. I know I did a lot of the stuff for Unit 5 is on the website. Please, though, do go through the key concept pages. Please go through the essay stuff and do those. And go through, when I post the links to the old essays, go through and see what they are. I mean, try to prepare yourself for these. Okay, we'll do one, maybe two more questions. I got one here. Can I go over what happened at Vietnam after two? Sure. Some of these things, I mean, you may need to know for his tests. I don't know how much they'll cover on the exam. Vietnam starts as after World War II. I'll go all the way through all of this. Um, and I'll thank you again for the kind words. I'll try to make it back at some point. Probably not just to say hi, though, unfortunately. Um, Vietnam after World War II is a French colony. The Vietnamese, just like every other colonial territory or nation at this time, decides that we no longer don't want to be controlled by other country. We want independence, and so they fight the French. And you have two sides with this. Vietnam starting to it does have people with communist ideals and values. That's certainly led by Ho Chi Minh, but he's one of the main ones to lead um, the victories against France and start to drive them out. The concerns with that the United States and France and some of these other countries have is, well, it's great that China or Vietnam is going to become independent, but we don't want to give it to Ho Chi Minh and give him power because then Vietnam will be a communist country. And then you have this whole domino theory. Well, if Vietnam's becomes communist, then Cambodia, then Thailand, then Laos, and all these other countries nearby may fall too. And they didn't want to lose all of Southeast Asia. So um, Vietnam basically is split in two. You have North Vietnam, which will be run by Ho Chi Minh, which will be communist. You have South Vietnam, which will be put in charge of a guy named Dien Bien Phu, who is really an awful person. But he was a puppet of, our government that, we put in power, and we kind of said, we'll help kind of keep you here as long as you don't do anything too ridiculous and you keep fighting the communists, and we'll support you. And so they did until the early 1960s, when that's where you start to see the monks self-immolate or light themselves on fire in public displays, and you have these other things. Fu was anybody who spoke out against them or had communist ties, he would jail and prison and kill. And so eventually he is assassinated and taken out. And so South Vietnam falls into chaos. North Vietnam seizes this opportunity as kind of their big push to unite Vietnam under one rule. And you see that's where the U.S. starts gets more and more involved, and we see the Vietnam War start. Rolling Thunder and Tet offensives are big things and pieces in the war. How important are they? I mean, the Tet offensives it was a big thing. I mean, that was, if I remember correctly, I'll be honest, my U.S. history in this part is not probably my strong suit as far as some of these details. The Tet offensive, I mean, was a big thing in the war. It really kind of set off bringing America more into it. Rolling Thunder is, I think, one of our big instances where we came in and just start dropping bombs all over Vietnam and Cambodia and other areas to kind of flesh out some of the communists. And obviously after, really what it boils down to almost 7-8 years of war and no real, movement in it. We're not losing the war. We're not winning the war. We slowly start the process of Vietnamization, which is to give South Vietnam back to Vietnamese and for us to get out of there. And shortly after we leave, the North is able to take over the South, and Vietnam becomes communist. So hopefully that helps, Justin. And So yeah, that's 9:30. I will post this and send the links, and as I said, over the next day or two, I'll start putting all my Unit 6 and other things I think of, review stuff and websites. I'll try to put it all up on the website for you guys. So please keep using that. Tell everybody else in class to keep using the website and to use those if they have questions. The website's still up and active in there for you, so keep using it. And like I said, I'll try to do something Monday. Um, Another review session where we can cover everything as best I can in an hour, hour and a half. And good luck. You guys will all do fine. I know you will. So thanks everybody. And we'll see you next week.